My name is Margaret Hayes, though everyone who has known me for more than a day calls me Maggie. For the past 6 months, my world, which had grown rather quiet since my dear husband Richard passed, had been re-enchanted by the promise of pure, unadulterated joy, a grand family trip to Disney World. On my polished mahogany dining table, a collection of brochures, printouts, and hand-drawn maps from my grandchildren formed a colorful, chaotic shrine to our upcoming adventure. At 73, I believed I had more than earned the right to be giddy about meeting Mickey Mouse. This wasn't just a vacation, it was to be a crowning event, a memory-making pilgrimage for 3 generations of the Hayes family. My son Michael, his wife Kimberly, and their 2 precious children, Olivia and Noah, along with my daughter Amy. All of us, together in the happiest place on earth. It was a dream Richard and I had wistfully imagined for our own children decades ago. But life, with its endless parade of mortgages and tuition fees, had always kept it just out of reach. Now I was determined to fulfill that promise for them all, carrying his memory with me. My role in this adventure was far more than just being the matriarchal mascot. For over 30 years, I had been the faithful steward of what Richard and I called the Hayes Family Heritage Fund. It began as a simple savings account, a place to tuck away a little extra from Richard's salary as an architect. Over the years, it grew, nurtured by prudent investments and my own frugal nature. It was our secret treasure, intended not for us, but for the future. It had helped with the down payment on Michael's first house and paid for the caterer at Amy's wedding. Now, with a balance that had blossomed to nearly $30,000, I saw its most noble purpose yet, to craft an experience of pure, unforgettable magic. I pictured the moment I would unveil the fund's contribution, perhaps at a grand family dinner before we left. I imagined their astonished faces, the joyous gasps, the heartfelt hugs. I saw myself using it not just to help, but to elevate. Upgrading our stay to the Grand Floridian, booking character breakfast for Olivia and Noah every single morning, and ensuring that every wish for a lightsaber or a princess gown could be instantly granted. This particular Tuesday afternoon, my Charleston home was filled with the sweet, comforting aroma of a bubbling peach cobbler made from Richard's mother's recipe. The worn, handwritten recipe card was propped against the sugar bowl, a sainted relic in my kitchen. Michael and Amy were due any moment for what they'd called a final logistics meeting. My bags were practically packed in my mind. I'd already purchased comfortable walking shoes, several light linen blouses, and a wide-brimmed straw hat that made me feel both elegant and sensible. A cheerful hum escaped my lips as I set out my best china plates for the cobbler, my heart thrumming with the sweet, pure anticipation of a child awaiting Santa Claus. My family was the sun, moon, and stars of my universe. My love for them was the bedrock of my existence. I glanced at the silver-framed photo on the sideboard. All of us at last year's Easter brunch, a sea of pastel colors and bright smiles. We were a good family, a close family, or so I firmly believed. Soon that photo would have a companion piece, all of us, beaming in front of Cinderella's castle. The doorbell chimed its familiar, gentle tune. Smoothing my apron, a wide, genuine smile stretching across my face, I moved to welcome my children. The final, perfect piece of my magical plan was about to fall into place. I could not have been more catastrophically mistaken. The smiles that greeted me at the door were not the easy, affectionate smiles I knew so well. They were pale imitations, thin and stretched, the kind of strained expressions people wear when they are bracing to cause pain. Michael, my ever-serious son, clutched a leather-bound portfolio like a barrister, about to present a grim case. Amy, my usually effervescent daughter, seemed to shrink in on herself, her gaze darting from my face to the potted fern by the door, as if the plant held a more palatable truth. The warm, peach-scented air in my home suddenly felt thick and suffocating, charged with a heavy, unspoken dread. I ushered them into the dining room, gesturing towards the warm cobbler and the waiting pot of coffee. "I made your favorite," I said, my voice bright with a hope that was already beginning to feel foolish. They both declined with polite, hurried murmurs. "Mama, we need to have a serious talk," Michael said, his tone shifting into the one he used for business negotiations, calm, reasonable, and utterly non-negotiable. We sat at the dining table, the glossy Disney World brochures scattered between us, like the wreckage of a beautiful dream. A slow, heavy beat began to drum against my ribs. Is everything all right? Are Olivia and Noah okay? I asked, my mind immediately flying to my grandchildren, the two brightest lights in my life. The kids are fine, Mama, Amy said, her voice a near whisper. She finally met my eyes, and what I saw there was a deep, unbearable pity that felt 1,000 times worse than anger. It's about the trip. Michael opened his portfolio, laying out printed itineraries and park schedules, as if they were evidence for the prosecution. Mama, Amy and I have been going over the final plans in detail, he began, and we've been looking at the reality of it. The sheer amount of walking, 10, maybe 12 miles a day. The humidity in Orlando in June. The crowds, the noise, the long lines. It's an incredibly demanding environment. He paused, letting the implications settle. And, I prompted, a cold, hard knot tightening in the pit of my stomach. And, he continued, taking a fortifying breath, we're just deeply concerned that it will all be too much for you. Your blood pressure, Mama. The way your joints act up when it's damp. We don't want you to push yourself to the point of exhaustion, or worse, have a medical issue so far from home. I stared at him, my mind reeling. I attended water aerobics 3 times a week at the community club. I walked my garden paths every single morning. I wasn't a porcelain doll. Michael, I am perfectly capable of taking a break when I need one, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I can sit on a bench and people watch while you all ride the roller coasters. I am not an invalid. Amy reached across the table, her hand resting on mine. It felt icy. It's not just about that, Mama, she said, her voice syrupy with false sympathy. It's about us. We wouldn't be able to relax. We'd be constantly worrying, asking if you're okay, if you need to sit, if you've had enough water. The trip is for the kids, really, and we want to be able to focus on them without being divided. Then came the words, delivered by Michael with a sigh of put-upon reluctance, that would forever alter the landscape of my heart. He looked at me directly, his gaze clinical. Frankly, Mama, managing your needs and schedule on top of everything else would be a lot. You're too much baggage. Baggage. The word landed not in my ears, but in my gut, a physical blow that knocked the wind from my lungs. I was not a mother, not a grandmother, not Maggie. I was an object, an inconvenience, a heavy suitcase to be lugged around, slowing everyone down. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the steady, damning tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. They were uninviting me from my own dream, a dream I was secretly planning to fund. So, I managed to say, my voice a hollow echo of itself, you're all going without me. Michael had the grace to look uncomfortable, but he nodded. We truly believe it's for the best. They left shortly after, leaving a trail of flimsy apologies and a beautiful, warm peach cobbler that was now as cold and shattered as my heart. After the front door clicked shut, the silence they left behind was not peaceful. It was a vast, roaring emptiness that consumed the comforting sounds of my home. I remained at the dining table for a time I couldn't measure, my gaze fixed on the cheerful, lying face of Mickey Mouse on a brochure. He grinned with a manic energy that now felt like a personal insult. The fairy tale castle on the cover looked like a fortress designed to keep people like me out. Too much baggage. The phrase looped in my mind, a cruel mantra of my own obsolescence. A hot wave of shame washed over me, so potent it felt like a fever. Was this truly what I had become to my own children? A frail, complaining, burdensome old woman whose needs were an intolerable imposition? I looked down at my hands, the familiar map of wrinkles and veins that charted a lifetime of devotion. These were the hands that had rocked their cradles, soothed their fevers, applauded their small victories, and held them tight through their first heartbreaks. And now, they saw these same hands as belonging to a liability. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, I stood and began to walk through my house. It was no longer a home. It was a museum dedicated to a love I had foolishly believed was unconditional and reciprocal. I touched the worn spine of the bedtime storybook I'd read to them 1,000 times. I traced the pencil marks on the pantry doorframe, charting their growth from toddlers to teenagers. I looked at the gallery of school photos on the upstairs landing, their bright, gap-toothed smiles a painful reminder of a time when my presence was not a problem to be solved, but the very center of their world. The initial stunning shock began to curdle, transmuting from profound sorrow into something else. In the armchair where Richard and I used to read the Sunday paper, I finally let myself weep. The tears were hot and bitter, mourning not just the canceled trip, but the death of a sacred illusion, my cherished role as the beloved matriarch of the Hayes family. I now understood, a relic, an honorable but ultimately inconvenient part of their past. As my tears subsided, a new emotion began to smolder in the cold ashes of my grief. It was a sharp, clean, and utterly unfamiliar heat. It was rage, a righteous, purifying fire. How dare they? How dare they use my age as a weapon against me? How dare they disguise their own selfish desire for an easier vacation as benevolent concern for my well-being? It was a cowardly, cruel deception, and the indignity of it burned away the last of my sadness. My posture straightened. My steps became firm as I walked back to the kitchen, my purpose now clear. My eyes landed on the small, tidy pile of mail on the counter. On top was the quarterly statement for the Hayes Family Heritage Fund. With a sharp, decisive tear, I ripped open the envelope. The numbers on the page seemed to glow with a new light. Available balance, $29,821.54. I stared at the sum, and it was as if a switch had been flipped in my soul. This money was not just currency. It was a liquid symbol of my love, my sacrifices, my lifelong generosity. It was the very resource I was going to use to make their dream trip perfect. And they had just told me I wasn't welcome to share in it. A slow, defiant smile, a stranger to my face, began to form on my lips. The fund was no longer for them. They had abdicated their right to it. It was my money, my baggage. And in that crystallizing moment, I decided I was going to take my baggage and check it in for a journey of my own. The anger that ignited in my heart was a powerful, high-octane fuel. It propelled me from the armchair of sorrow and into the stiff-backed office chair in Richard's old study. The room, which I usually kept as a quiet memorial, suddenly felt like a command center. The old desktop computer whirred to life, its familiar hum a steadying presence in the otherwise silent house. My first impulse was simply to go somewhere, anywhere other than here, where every corner held a memory now tainted by betrayal. But as the internet browser opened, a specific, cherished memory rose to the surface of my mind, as clear as day. It was our 30th anniversary. We were celebrating at a lovely but not extravagant restaurant downtown. Richard, ever the romantic, had raised his glass of house Chardonnay. "One day, Maggie," he'd said, his eyes twinkling. "One day, when the kids are settled and we've got a bit of a nest egg, I'm taking you to London. We'll have high tea at the Ritz, see a show in the West End every night, and you'll wear a proper Burberry trench coat." We never made it. The nest egg became the Heritage Fund, and one day never came. "London," I whispered, the word tasting of history and elegance. It felt like the perfect antidote to the plastic fantasy of Disney World. It was a city for adults. It was a city for me. My fingers, which had trembled with grief just an hour before, were now steady with resolve as I typed first-class flights to London Heathrow into the search engine. The results loaded, and my breath caught in my chest. The prices were breathtaking, the kind of numbers I associated with a down payment on a small car. For a fleeting moment, the deeply ingrained frugality of my nature screamed in protest. The ghost of my sensible self wrung her hands, whispering that this was the children's inheritance, that it was reckless, that it was a selfish indulgence. But then, Michael's voice, cool and dismissive, echoed in my memory. "You're too much baggage." No, this was not their inheritance anymore. This was my back pay. This was my golden parachute from a lifetime of thankless emotional labor. I clicked on the British Airways website, my heart beginning to hammer with a thrilling combination of terror and glee. I navigated to the first-class booking page, which unfolded to reveal a world of impossible luxury. It wasn't a seat. It was a private suite. A plush armchair that transformed into a fully flat bed, complete with a mattress topper and a crisp duvet, a personal wardrobe, a chilled cabinet for champagne, a menu designed by a world-class chef. It was a universe away from the cramped, sticky, kid-filled cabin I had been picturing for the flight to Orlando. It was opulent, it was defiant, it was absolutely perfect. With a steady hand, I selected a round-trip ticket, departing 3 days before my family's scheduled flight to Orlando and returning a week after they got back. The grand total appeared on the screen, $21,400. It was a truly scandalous amount of money to spend on oneself. It was the antithesis of everything I had ever been. I took a deep, shuddering breath, moved the cursor over the confirm purchase button, and thought of Richard's unfulfilled promise. I thought of my children's pitying, patronizing faces. I thought of the lonely weeks I was supposed to spend here, in this house, while they were off making family memories without me. My finger clicked the mouse with a decisive snap. The screen refreshed. "Congratulations, Margaret. Your journey to London is confirmed." A powerful jolt of pure, intoxicating freedom coursed through my veins. I hadn't just purchased a plane ticket. I had purchased my own emancipation. The days that followed were lived in a state of thrilling duality. To my children, I was the very picture of a woman in quiet, dignified retreat. When Amy called, her voice dripping with a careful, cloying sympathy, to see how I was holding up, I played my part with Oscar-worthy finesse. "Oh, I'm getting by, darling," I'd sigh into the receiver, my voice soft and a little weary, "just spending some time in the garden. You know, you and Michael were probably right. A big trip like that would have been a lot for me. You all just focus on having a wonderful time with the little ones." As I spoke those meek words, I was carefully folding a newly purchased, exquisitely soft cashmere shawl into a sleek, graphite-colored suitcase. The suitcase itself was a statement, a feather-light, four-wheeled marvel of modern design, a world away from the sturdy, sensible, and utterly cumbersome luggage I would have checked for the family trip. My days became a secret mission, to assemble a wardrobe worthy of a sophisticated woman embarking on a solo adventure in London. I drove to the exclusive King Street shopping district, a place I normally only browsed. I bypassed the familiar department stores and walked into a small, curated boutique where a chic young woman, who didn't seem to notice I was over 40, helped me. "I'm going to London," I announced with a confidence that surprised even me. "And I want to look timeless." She rose to the occasion, pulling together tailored wool trousers, elegant silk blouses, a classic honey-colored trench coat that felt like armor, and a collection of vibrant scarves. Each item I purchased felt like I was casting off a layer of my old identity, the self-effacing mother, the doting mama, and stepping into the shoes of someone else entirely, Margaret Hayes, a woman of means and mystery. The most empowering secret of all was the money. With a few clicks on my computer, I transferred the entire balance of the Heritage Fund into my personal checking account. Seeing that formidable number listed under my name, and my name alone, sent a quiet, triumphant thrill through me. It was a tangible measure of my newfound autonomy. I paid for the flight and then went online to book a beautiful room at the Savoy, a hotel whose very name was synonymous with the kind of old-world luxury Richard had dreamed of. I booked theater tickets for 3 different shows, made a reservation for afternoon tea, and arranged for a private car to take me to the airport. I did it all without a whisper of guilt. The guilt had been incinerated in the fire of their rejection, and in its place was a growing, glowing ember of anticipation. The night before my departure, I packed my new case with my beautiful things. I laid out my travel attire, the perfectly cut trousers, a cream-colored cashmere sweater, and a chic Hermes scarf I'd splurged on. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror, and for the first time in decades, I didn't see a mother, a widow, or a grandmother. I saw Margaret, a woman on the brink of an adventure. The thought made me laugh out loud, a full-throated, joyful sound that echoed in the quiet house. It was the beautiful sound of my own liberation. On the morning of my departure, I didn't trouble my children for a ride. Instead, a gleaming black Lincoln Town car, which I had booked myself, purred to a stop at my curb, precisely at the arranged time. As it pulled away from my house, I felt a delicious, liberating wave of anonymity wash over me. I was not Mama being chauffeured. I was Miss Hayes, a client. The airport experience was a study in contrasts that I savored with every fiber of my being. I sailed past the chaotic, sprawling lines for economy check-in, a maelstrom of stressed parents, wailing toddlers, and mountains of luggage. The very scene of domestic chaos my children had so condescendingly sought to protect me from. My path led me to the hushed, carpeted sanctuary of the first-class check-in counter. There was no queue. A woman with a serene smile and a crisp uniform greeted me by name before I even spoke. "Welcome, Miss Hayes. It is a pleasure to have you with us today." She presented me with my boarding pass and a heavy, cream-colored invitation to the airline's exclusive pre-flight lounge. The lounge was another dimension entirely. It was a haven of tranquility, all muted tones, deep armchairs, and the gentle clinking of glasses. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh coffee. I accepted a glass of chilled champagne from a passing waiter and settled into a leather wingback chair overlooking the tarmac, where planes were taking off like giant, graceful birds. I was surrounded by men in bespoke suits and women with an air of effortless elegance. I belonged. No one glanced at me with a hint of pity or saw me as a potential nuisance. I was simply another traveler, enjoying a civilized moment of repose before a journey. The boarding process was equally serene. I was the first to be personally escorted onto the aircraft. When I arrived at my suite, 1A, I had to physically restrain myself from gasping aloud. It was less a seat and more a personal drawing room in the sky. I hung my new trench coat in my private wardrobe, sank into the ridiculously plush, wide seat, and stretched my legs out completely. A flight attendant named Evelyn, whose smile was warm and genuine, appeared as if by magic. "Missy, Hayes, may I bring you something to drink while we prepare for departure? We have an excellent 2008 Dom Perignon." I had only ever read the name in novels. "That would be lovely, thank you, Evelyn," I said, my voice as smooth as the leather of my seat. She returned with a tall, delicate flute filled with the palest gold, most exquisite bubbles I had ever seen. As the rest of the passengers boarded, I sat in my private world, shielded from the hustle and bustle. The heavy cabin door sealed with a satisfying sigh. The powerful engines began to hum, a deep, promising thrum that vibrated through the floor. As the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the air with breathtaking grace, I raised my glass. I had no one to clink it with, so I saluted the clouds gathering outside my window. Below me, Charleston, with its familiar streets and complicated memories, shrank until it was just a pattern on the earth. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the fine champagne. It tasted of defiance, of solitude, of absolute and glorious victory. London did not just meet my expectations. It welcomed me as if I were a long-lost friend. The moment the liveried doorman at the Savoy greeted me with a warm, "Welcome home, Miss Hayes," I felt a profound sense of rightness, of having arrived in a place where I truly belonged. My room was a masterpiece of understated elegance, with a view over the Thames that shimmered like a silver ribbon. My first morning, I awoke not to the jarring ring of an alarm, but to the gentle morning light filtering through the shears. I ordered a full English breakfast from room service, served on a table with a starched white linen cloth, and ate it while reading the Times, just as I imagined Richard would have wanted. I was living our shared dream, but it was, I realized, becoming entirely my own. My days took on a beautiful, unhurried rhythm, dictated by nothing but my own whims. I was gloriously, wonderfully free from the tyranny of anyone else's needs or schedules. I spent an entire, blissful afternoon at the Tate Britain, sitting for an hour in front of Turner's magnificent, turbulent seascapes, feeling a kinship with their wild energy. I wandered through the cobbled streets of Covent Garden, listening to the soaring notes of an opera singer performing for the crowds, and bought myself a ridiculously expensive but beautiful leather-bound journal. One crisp afternoon, I indulged in the full high tea experience at Fortnum & Mason. Seated at a small table, I was served a three-tiered stand of exquisite finger sandwiches, warm scones with clotted cream and strawberry jam, and an array of delicate pastries. I savored every bite, every sip of Earl Grey tea, feeling utterly decadent and content in my solitude. I did, of course, think of my family at Disney World. I pictured them in the Florida heat, Michael consulting his laminated schedules, Amy trying to wrangle two overexcited children. I genuinely hoped they were having a good time, for the children's sake. But their vacation seemed a world away, a noisy, frantic Technicolor movie I was no longer a part of. My life was here, in the gray, elegant, historic reality of London. Before I left, I found a beautiful, classic postcard showing the Houses of Parliament at twilight. I sat at the writing desk in my hotel room and wrote a simple message on the back. Thinking of you all. Hope you had a magical time and that the baggage wasn't too much to handle. With love, Mama. I addressed it to my own home. It would be a quiet little surprise waiting in their mail pile upon their return. It was a small, perfectly aimed arrow, feathered with southern grace. On my final evening, I wore my new silk blouse and attended a performance of Les Miserables. As the cast sang the final soaring notes of Do You Hear the People Sing? I felt tears welling in my eyes. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a deep, resonant joy. I was hearing my own song of rebellion, and it was the most beautiful music in the world. Returning home to my quiet house in Charleston felt different. The silence was no longer a void of loneliness. It was a peaceful sanctuary that I had earned. It was filled with the lingering glow of my adventure. The house was mine again. A few days later, my family returned, their skin sun-kissed and their energy depleted. My postcard was, as I'd planned, waiting for them, Amy called that evening, her voice laced with a curious mixture of suspicion and confusion. Mama, we got your postcard. What an odd thing to write about baggage. Did you have a nice quiet week? I played the part of the contented homebody one last time. Oh, it was very restful, dear. Just what the doctor ordered. Tell me everything about your trip. She gave a tired, lackluster account. The lines were unbearable. Noah had a meltdown in Fantasyland, and Michael had spent most of the time on his work phone. It was a far cry from the magical pilgrimage they had envisioned. An unspoken question hung between us like a thick fog, but she lacked the nerve to ask it directly. The grand reveal came later that night, in the court of public opinion, social media. I had been leisurely scrolling through my tablet when Michael's vacation photos popped up. There they were, a gallery of forced cheerfulness against a backdrop of manufactured magic. The caption read, "Incredible week, making memories with the most important people in the world. Hash family, first hash. Disney magic hash. Blessed. Family first." The hypocrisy was so rich, so potent, it was almost comical. I looked at their strained smiles, and then I opened my own camera roll to the single photo I had asked the lovely flight attendant Evelyn to take. In it, I am the very picture of radiance. I'm reclining in my first-class suite, a contented, genuine smile gracing my lips. My flute of Dom Perignon is raised in a cheerful toast. The opulent, exclusive cabin is unmistakably not economy. It was time I decided to post my own vacation update. I uploaded the photograph. For the caption, I took my time, choosing my words with the care of a poet. Some said I might be too much baggage for a trip to Florida. So I took my baggage and treated it to a first-class ticket to London instead. It turns out self-worth is surprisingly lightweight and fits perfectly in a carry-on. Cheers. Hash London calling, hash first-class, hash no baggage, hash the Savoy guy. I hit the post button. The effect was immediate and spectacular. My tablet began to buzz and ping relentlessly. Within 2 minutes, my phone rang. It was Michael. I let it ring 4 times, taking a slow, delicious breath before answering. "Mama, what on earth is this picture?" he demanded, his voice a squeak of pure, undiluted shock and outrage. "Are you in first class? You went to London? Where did you get the money for that? Is that champagne?" I leaned back in Richard's old office chair, feeling a profound sense of calm. "I used the Hayes Family Heritage Fund, Michael," I said, my voice as smooth and cool as glass. "When you and Amy decided that my presence was an unacceptable burden for your trip, I decided that my contribution would be too. I simply redirected the funds to a passenger who was deeply appreciated." A stunned, sputtering silence met my words. I could hear Amy's frantic whispering in the background. But Mama, that was our family money. That was for the kids," he finally stammered. "Yes, dear, it was," I replied. a gentle smile playing on my lips, though he couldn't see it. It was for the family. But you taught me such a valuable lesson on your way to see the Magic Kingdom. True independence is the real magic. You wanted to travel light, and I was happy to lighten your load. I ended the call before he could formulate a response, and then I switched my phone to silent. I picked up a travel guide to Italy that I'd bought at the airport. Perhaps Florence in the spring. I heard the art is simply divine.